Hello there, this is Mark Rivera from GenreOnlinenet, and I am here now to give a feature-length audio commentary for the film Trapped by Television, which is a 1936 film directed by Lowe with a screenplay by Lee Loeb, Harold Buchanan, based on a story by Sherman Lowe and Al Martin. The film was produced by Bill Pivar, and it stars Mary Astor, Lyle Tabbitt, and Nick Pendleton. At the time when this film was released, the first televisions had not yet even begun to be shipped to consumers, although the technology had been experimented and developed all the way through the 1920s. Television would still not really become widely available until the 1950s. And when you see the difference between the television depicted here and what televisions were as they were released in time, this TV actually looks more high-tech, reminiscent of the flat panel screen CRT tube televisions that were popular in the late 1990s and the early 2000s before technologies like plasma, LED, and later OLED became affordable. But there was a time when those types of technologies either didn't yet exist or were very expensive.
You listen to me. You haven't earned a dime in a week. Are you supposed to be a bill collector or a professor?
Oh, look, science is my hobby, that's all.
Oh, yeah? Well, how would you like to spend all your time fiddling with that hobby?
Oh, gee, that'd be swell.
All right, Marconi. You're fired.
Oh, look, I was only kidding. See, I'm laughing. Can't you take a joke?
All right, then. Get out and get this. Fred Dennis owes $164. The money or the machinery?
Chief, it's as good as in your pocket.
For me, Nat Pendleton steals this movie. He has a kind of a rough face about him, and yet he's perfect for this role because he looks like the type of guy that, quite honestly, would come to your house to get your money that you owe. And yet, he plays it off like a heart of gold, as you'll start to see as the movie goes on.
And who are you?
Well, I'm a bill collector, and he owes us money.
He owes you money. How about me 3 months' rent? And take my word for it, if you don't pay pretty quick, he won't live here much longer.
Oh, you don't know how to handle those guys. He's probably got a whole sock full of money. Maybe under the mattress.
Do you really think so?
Sure.
Say, mister, I'm asking you a favor. Do you think you could get me rent for me?
Well, now, that ain't exactly in my line.
Oh, don't worry. I'll see that you get your share.
Now you're talking. Just leave it to me.
So you can see how things work out in this story as the two main characters of the inventor and the bill collector meet.
Is your name Frederick Dennis?
Yeah.
I represent the Acme Collection Agency. How about this bill?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I know about that.
Well, why don't you pay it?
Oh, I intend to pay it, if you'll give me a couple of months.
A couple of months? You've been owing it for 8 months already.
Well, I know, but if I can get this machine completed, I'm sure I'll have enough to pay you.
Listen, brother, I don't want to hear any of your sob stuff. I'm here to get either the money or the equipment. Which is it going to be?
Now, can you imagine, by 21st century standards, what and how people would react if a bill collector came to your house literally and acted like this? I'm not talking about the type of case where, unfortunately, where people get evicted and the police come and literally move them out if they haven't already vacated the premises. I'm talking about literally, what if your credit card company sent a muscle-bound guy to your house because you were late with the payment? I don't know if that was acceptable in the 1930s, but if you see even some of the reforms that were made in the last 50 years with regard to debt collection, you'll see that things are a lot different.
Say, what do you call this contraption?
Oh, that's the televisor.
The televisor, as you see here, is actually something that's supposed to resemble what would be now considered a camera like you would see in a television studio, whether it be for a late night talk show or a news program, or in this particular case, a sitcom or a comedy in general, whether it be a half-hour length or feature length. This film, for me, has a very whimsical quality to it. And although it does have the science fiction moniker on it, it really isn't science fiction by modern standards. It's science fiction only because television was still anticipated.
Well, you see, science is my hobby. And if I was to take them things back, now, would that be a scientific attitude?
You mean you might let me keep the pots for a while?
Well, something like that. Seeing as science is my hobby.
Gee, you're a swell guy.
So, as I said before, I like Mr. Pendleton here as the debt collector, mostly because you look at him and he looks like he could be, a heavy for somebody working for a gangster, even a Dick Tracy villain. And you see like how this big guy with somewhat rough exterior character expression can really come off like the exact opposite. Like he looks like one type of person and he's really the exact opposite, kind of like a pussycat.
It ain't the policy of the Acme to threaten people. But if you don't kick in with that dough fast, I'm coming up there myself and smack you right on the button.
Now, can you imagine if you got a phone call like that today? You'd probably, after the lawsuit that you would be able to wage against this person for threatening you and harassing you, would probably have him owing you a debt. Now, I'm exaggerating a bit, but, in the mid-1970s, early 1980s, I remember there was an epidemic of abusive phone calls and that sort of thing coming from debt collectors that were literally driving people insane. I mean, putting them in the hospital. Their nerves were so shattered, and that led to reforms that, thank God, have helped a lot of people.
Listen, you. I don't care if I work for you or not. I can get plenty of jobs, see? And I got a good notion to pop you for that college kid crack.
Oh, wait a minute, Spike. Now, don't get excited. Don't hit him. Look out, Chief. You don't know what you're doing.
Not bad. Not bad at all.
So, there have been a lot of reforms in the last 40 or 50 years, but it's just interesting to consider how at one point this might have been acceptable. So I don't know what else to say about that other than to say that if you owe money, it's always good to get out of debt, but so long as you don't owe money to a loan shark, be grateful for the systems that have been put into place today, because Lord knows, I wouldn't want a guy like Rocky showing up to in front of my door because I was late with a bill. Now, these two actresses, Barbara, the actress who plays Barbara is named Mary Astor, and Joyce Compton plays May Collins, are kind of great counterpart foils for the two male characters of the inventor and the debt collector with the heart of gold. In some ways, they're not grifters, but you'll see that they do kind of scheme a little bit, but no different, I suppose, than anybody in this time would, as you'll see.
One of these days, we'll hit something that'll put us on easy street.
Sure.
Now here's our inventor coming as a newly minted debt collector, trying to get the money for the device that will make his great invention work.
Say, what is your business?
I'm here to collect the bill.
Oh, well, Miss Blake isn't in.
Thanks. I'll come back later. Miss Blake?
Yes?
I'd like to see you for a moment. Your secretary said you weren't in.
She said I wasn't in. Is this true?
Well, yeah, but
There are no buts, Miss Collins. This has happened before, and if it occurs again, I shall be compelled to give you notice.
I'm very sorry, Miss Blake. It won't happen again.
So now we enter the main plot of the story, which is these different converging forces coming together all over the anticipation of who's going to be the first to be able to broadcast television. You have the inventor with his latest creation, as well as the bill collector that helps him, and then competition from a rival scientist who's backed up by a crime magnate that wants to basically hold it over another corporation to get the highest price. The film has not a screwball comedy type vibe, because it's not that type of comedy, but at the same time, it does kind of remind me of the Coen Brothers comedy, The Hudsucker Proxy. And although I don't think this film was at all an inspiration to the Coen Brothers, I do think films around this time period may have been an inspiration for the Coens in the making of the film The Hudsucker Proxy.
Yes, of course. But, Mr. Dennis, let me ask you just one more question. What does this diagram mean?
Oh, that's just a rough outline of an invention of mine.
Invention? In what field?
Television.
Well, you must be clever. Our best scientists have been working on television for years.
Yes, I know, but I think I've an entirely new theory.
But can you prove your theory?
Oh, this is not just a lot of talk. I'm close to finishing the actual machine.
Really? Why, Mr. Dennis, that's very interesting. I'm tremendously interested in the advancement of television.
I'll be glad to explain the principle to you sometime.
Oh, that's not enough. I want to see it at once.
See, in the Hudsucker Proxy, it's the hula hoop that's the big invention.
Well, if it does what you say it will, the entire industry will be affected. Mr. Dennis, have you a manager?
No, I haven't.
Then this is the luckiest day of your life. Remember, opportunity knocks but once.
Did you say once?
Excuse me.
The film now has these characters meet and develop a union.
I've been wanting to meet you for a long time.
What do you mean? I never saw you before.
Oh, that's all right. I'm glad to meet you anyway.
These ladies have been looking at the machine.
Oh, it's a swell invention, ain't it?
Rocky's my best friend. He's liable to be a little prejudiced.
Oh, not at all. I can hardly be called a friend of yours, and yet I think it has tremendous possibilities.
Oh, thanks very much.
So, in comparison, you have these characters uniting to try and promote television. And if you've seen the movie The Hudsucker Proxy, it's a film starring Tim Robbins, Jennifer Jason Leigh, Paul Newman, and even Bruce Campbell. And it deals with both corporate and news outlets and the release during the Great Depression of the hula hoop, as Tim Robbins would describe as something for the kids. Now we're going to meet our villain of the piece. This is the organized crime figure who has a thing for darts.
It depends on what news Standish brings.
Let me out of here. Let me out. You can't hold me here.
How long are you going to keep Tanner in there? Till the deal with Paragon goes through?
Now we see the corporate office, and you'll see this beautiful Art Deco design behind the company head when they have the meeting sequence.
Years of research, thousands of dollars spent to perfect television, and then our engineer and his assistant disappear.
You see what the main plot is that the engineers have been kidnapped by the organized crime figures. This gentleman behind the head of the company is actually working with the organized crime figures so that they can corner the market on their own version of television, which they can then sell at a profit back to this corporate leader. And this corporate leader, because of bad investments, is facing bankruptcy. And so television has become the most anticipated commodity that could spell making it or breaking it in big business circa the 1930s. Now, while, as I said before, that television was in existence in the 1920s in terms of development in the 1930s, most people did not even see a television by this point. So the depiction of the TV, as already noted, looks a lot like a cross between a rear projection television and a flat screen tube TV. You can see now the conspiracy going on with the assistant to the head of the company and the gangster over here with the large forehead.
How'd you make out?
Curtis is ready to buy. Told me to start in getting bids.
You'll never sell Curtis back his own machine. I won't let you. He paid for that invention. It belongs to him.
It's starting to get me nervous.
I'll get out of here all right. And when I do, I'm going to believe.
I tell you, somebody's going to hear him.
Maybe you're right.
Now, at the time I'm recording this commentary, the 5th season of Fargo just finished its run on FX and Hulu. And it's interesting because that had a lot of themes regarding debt and debt collection and owing people and whatnot. And we could just see how much things have changed in some ways where literally there was a time when people could come to your house and threaten you if you were late with a bill. And I'm not talking about loan sharks here. Obviously, loan sharks would be a lot worse. But like I said before, there was a time when people literally were persecuted for their debt. And while people will still get phone calls and letters and so forth, it's nothing like what's was shown here early on and what's implied.
Hey, you don't really think that machine's any good, do you?
I don't think it can squeeze orange juice. What difference does it make? It looks complicated enough to fool anybody, and that's all we need.
What could be more complicated than learning Greek in 6 lessons? Look where that got us.
But don't you understand? Television is sweeping the country. Everybody's interested in it, and practically nobody knows the first thing about it. That's where the chumps come in. Curtis would fall for it like a ton of bricks.
What I find interesting about these two girls is that they're not grifters, but obviously you could see that they have a selfish tendency about them. And I don't know, they're not evil or anything like that. But nevertheless, they are, for lack of a better expression, opportunists. Now, this is the Art Deco meeting room that, in my opinion, reminds me a lot of something shown in the Hudsucker Proxy, albeit in a different context. In that film, Paul Newman plays the head of the company, and when something happens because it takes place during the Great Depression and somebody's responsible for a bad decision or whatnot, rather than face it, literally you see one person jump on the table, run and try to jump out the window, only to find that the glass is too strong for him, and he literally begins to slide down. It was a funny scene that was featured in the trailer. And if you're wondering why I keep mentioning the movie, it's simply because I actually think that that film is a film that deserves to be reinvestigated. I think that, it deserves a new viewing in time that had passed, because it's not really a bad film. It is just basically the film that came out in between the 1-2 punch of Miller's Crossing and Barton Fink and Fargo and The Big Lebowski. So it was just kind of an in-between film. But I do think it's definitely worthy of second evaluation, and I do believe that films like this really do possibly offer an idea of the inspiration of of that type of film that they made. Basically, I think that they, like many filmmakers, look back upon the past and films and ideas that inspire them and put it into their own spin. And as a result, what they're great at is creating worlds within worlds. Kind of like the way Sunset Boulevard creates its own world within a world. The world being the world of Sunset Boulevard and its characters, and the world of Hollywood being the external world and the comparison between what is the fantasy and the reality. Now, this is again another type of, not a cliched character, but more or less, if you have the debt collector with a heart of gold, this would be the corporate leader with a heart of gold of sorts. And basically what occurs is that, well, you'll see for yourself when it happens, but he basically is trying to keep from going bankrupt. And so the anticipation of who's going to be first to market with the ability to record and broadcast television is quite important, much like the way the internet became important to the public in the early 1990s. In fact, I would say the internet is probably the biggest invention of media and media distribution to come out since the advent of both radio and television. Now, at this time, most people had radios in their homes, but imagine the idea of a radio with pictures, which is basically, I guess, how they would look at a television, at least those who were just learning about them in the 1930s and would actually begin to own them later on. I think television really probably took off in the 1950s as more people were able to afford them. And then, like anything else, the technology of television grew from black and white to color to larger screens to flat screens to alternate technologies to the CRT tube and more. And when you compare that to the internet, it's kind of the journey to various speeds of dial-up to ISDN and now high-speed and
Promise you won't
Wi-Fi.
interrupt until I finish. Now, promise.
All right, go ahead.
Do you know that I am the sole representative for a man who has the greatest invention since the electric light? Remember your promise. And do you know that just because you're my friend, I'm going to give you the chance to invest $2,000 in it? For that measly sum of money, Paragon will have the option on the most efficient, practical, and economical television set in the world.
Miss Blake, it cost me $200 to find out that people are still peeling potatoes in the same old way. It cost me another $200 to find out that you can't teach Greek in 6 easy lessons. And now you come here and ask me for $2,000 for a television machine. Why, it's ridiculous.
But this is...
So, anyway, think about that, because I remember people much older than me, people that were probably teenagers of the 60s, and when the internet was first being showcased as what you think it could be in the early 1990s and started seeing things that were kind of awkward on TV and in the
you're
movies.
making a great mistake. This is the opportunity of a lifetime. Only $2,000.
No!
Paragon will be sitting on top of the world.
No!
I won't take no for an answer.
No! Will you go home?
No. I'm going to convince you if it's the last thing I do.
Well, you're wasting your time. No! There you are. $200. And I'll charge it up to charity.
It's not charity, Mr. Curtis. Here's your option. You will thank the day I came into this office.
I'll thank you to get out.
See, this is what I mean by heart of gold. How many corporate leaders do you know today would take a personal meeting, say no as emotionally as that man did, and then just write you a check for $200? Which you have to remember, in 1936, money is a lot more. Now, one of the things I found interesting about this film is at one point they mentioned making a nickel phone call. And in the 1970s into the early 80s, you could make a public telephone call for 10 cents. Then they raised it to 25. And, well, quite honestly, now all the payphones are gone, and I don't know how much it would cost to make a phone call because we all have cell phones. But there is something to be said about analog technology. And it comes down to this. While I love the iPhone, and I think that it really is the Swiss Army knife of all things, and cell phones have become a necessity, they've become a necessity in part because if you're in trouble and you need to use a public phone, you're going to be out of luck. Because in big cities like New York, they literally took out every single pay telephone there used to be. And personally, I'm a person that believes that you should preserve the analog technology next to the digital technology. In fact, they both should exist because if something happens, analog will still work. For instance, copper lines for telephone calls. When you have a blackout, if you have an old copper line telephone, it's still going to work regardless of power. But if there's a major blackout in a city or a suburb or anywhere for that matter, and you're getting digital telephone from your cable provider and so forth, when that power goes out, you lose your services. And basically what makes cell phones work is basically powers going from one antenna to another antenna at different shortwave lengths, especially with 5G. And then that's also made all the more capable with satellites orbiting the Earth that basically are able to bounce the signals. And now, well, it's not uncommon to get Wi-Fi on their subway stations. But nevertheless, things that we didn't think about back in the 1990s when the internet was still this wonderful device and it was a luxury instead of a necessity. People, there are just things that we have to deal with today that we didn't have to deal with before. And I imagine that television is something that for the 1930s, when you had radio and the theater of the mind, was kind of both an outstanding type of thing to look forward to, and at the same time, it was also something that would change the way people consumed entertainment. I mean, when I was in high school, they used to refer to television as the idiot box. And yet, that would be an unfair comparison in terms of you can get a lot and learn a lot from television in the same way that you can watch YouTube and learn a lot from the different types of programs that are made by creators. Yet, there's always that menu that can be entertainment, or if you want to think of it, it's like going to a store and buying some healthy food and then some junk food at the same time.
Oh, May, did you say there were 2 eggs in the house?
Yeah, why?
Well, if you're hungry, you better start cooking them.
Say, I'm thinking something. Well, will you please tell me I'm wrong?
You're right.
Oh, not the whole 200. Well, of all the unconscious jellyfish I ever saw, you take the cake. With a couple of streetcar tokens between us and the poorhouse, you throw a whole bankroll into the lap of a goofy inventor.
What's interesting to note is the laws for renters have changed a lot too, depending on the state you live in. For instance, I'm in New York, so there's a lot of protection given to renters in New York. Basically, there's rent control. If you fall into hard times, you can't just be tossed out onto the street. However, in some states in the union today, if you're more than a week late with your rent, you can be evicted. And when I found that out, I'm not going to say which state it is, but when I heard about it, I thought to myself, that's crazy.
Hey, be careful with that. That's the most expensive piece of equipment I've got.
What is it?
A cathode ray tube.
Gee, ain't science wonderful?
It's kind of amazing when you think about it that a CRT tube would be the equivalent of the highest form of technology when it comes to television. And this basically is what makes it kind of interesting to me, because we don't have CRT tubes, although nobody makes them anymore. If they do make them, it's for novelty's sake. Pretty much we've all moved on to flat panel televisions, which have definitely gone down in price and given us superior picture quality that, was not even available in the early 2000s. I mean, I love OLED technology. I know people that still swear by plasma, and I've seen beautiful LED TVs too. But there was a time when a flat screen CRT television was the only thing that a person who had some resources could think of affording, because at that point, the original plasma type televisions that were released cost a lot more money than even an OLED television costs today. And that technology has become much more affordable over the years, as it should, because I don't think that anybody should be held back because of the economics of retail. Now, this is the camera. As I said before, it looks kind of like the cameras you see in a television studio. It also looks like something out of a Buck Rogers or a Flash Gordon film. It basically has its camera built in and a lens, but it also looks like a ray gun or a cannon.
I don't know what to say. I ain't much of an actor. All I know is bill collecting. And science is my hobby. You getting me, Fred? In case you didn't get me before, I'm telling you again. Science is my hobby. I got character and personality. And I like science. It's my hobby. How am I doing, Fred? In case you didn't hear me before, I'm telling you again. Science is my hobby. You see, science is my hobby. I'd invent something of my own, only I don't know what.
So like I said before, this is like a flat screen CRT TV mixed in with kind of a flat panel rear projection television, just in terms of the size and look of it. I mean, can you imagine if you could have a television this big in the 1930s, let alone any television at all?
Mr. Dennis! Mr. Dennis! Mr. Dennis!
With me?
Well, unfortunately, landlords haven't changed that much depending on where you live. If you live in a house, you have a lot less rental rights, unfortunately, than you do if you rent an apartment, which is something that I think more people should learn, at least here in the state of New York. So, as I was saying before, with regard to technology, the advent of the internet in the early 1990s, back when it first came out, you had 4 or 5 different dial-up services. The highest speed, I think, was ISDN. There were no cable modems yet. And the journey to 56K baud mode dial-up modem would basically stretched itself out for years. I mean, if you look at the way the modem that Ferris Bueller has in Ferris Bueller's Day Off looks, that modem is slower than the top speed dial-up modem that would be out 10 years after the fact. And yet, back then, that was the technology for the affluent. Because if you ever noticed in John Hughes films, there's only two types of people. Either people who are very poor or wealthy people. And you could see this in films like Pretty in Pink, to a certain extent Some Kind of Wonderful, and also you could see it contrasted with the characters of movies like Weird Science, and even 16 Candles gives you an upper middle class family, because that really was part of the Reagan era type of illusion. It was as if we were all in this great era of prosperity. And I was a teenager in the 1980s, and I loved the 80s. But nevertheless, I can truly say that people now, we all know that there's more have-nots than there are haves, and the haves are developing more and more to the point where they have more resources than the have-nots put together. But back in the 1980s, you had this hope for living in a middle-class life that, that would enable you to go places, enable you to raise a family, have a roof over your head, retire at the age of 65, that sort of thing. And nowadays, well, it's not that it doesn't exist, but it just doesn't seem like it's no longer a part of the American dream. It's kind of like privacy in the 21st century. Andy Warhol said something like, in the future, everyone will be famous, I believe, for 15 minutes. Well, I say in the future, everybody will be anonymous for 15 seconds. And that's really the problem here. Look at the gangster here. Doesn't he look like the leader from the Hulk, the Hulk villain, the leader? Just like the size of his forehead and the way it looks shaped in the lighting and stuff like that. He looks like that villain. Now, this part's pretty interesting because this is something that this film depicts that actually would become something that is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And that's simply the right to broadcast sports on television, streaming, and what have you. The idea being they're going to do a demonstration by recording a football game and having it play back to the head of the corporation that they hope to sell the television to. Now, who would have ever thought that that industry and that idea would grow into what it is today? I mean, and how much people have to pay, even to be able to watch something on free, for the broadcaster to get a license. They're paying tons of money, which is why you get tons of commercials.
I had to pull a lot of wires to get permission for you to do this.
If it works out, buy you the football field.
Yeah, thanks.
So, Trapped by Television actually predicted the rise of sports being broadcast on television long before people could own one. And when you look at, of course, radio existed, so games were broadcast. I would say sports is one of the major things that probably sold television in the same way that there were certain types of programming that helped sell home video to the masses, which I won't get into because that's a whole nother type of subject for a different film, perhaps. Now, likening this to the internet, I remember knowing people that were much older than I was, and they would come up to me like, Mark, I just saw this movie, and boy, I would sure love to take a look at your computer and see how it works. And back then you had that annoying noise when the modem would communicate with the network. And when you really think about it, at that point, just before people were really going to start getting high speed and eventually the dial-up modems would all disappear, at that moment, when you got up to 56K, unless you had an ISDN line or something like that, the development of broadcast television and the internet, I should say, really was in its infancy. And I remember, like, it would take hours to download a little QuickTime trailer of a movie I wanted to see, and if I wanted the highest quality download, that's the reason why it would take hours. And now it's all of our television programming, for the most part, comes through streaming. And indeed, while local broadcast network television, which can be gotten for free over the air, does actually look superior to things like digital cable, in a way, in a very big way actually, the old media and sources like cable television have truly given away to streaming. And I remember when streaming, and it wasn't that long ago, was the way of saving money and cutting the cord. So basically, we now have, many streaming networks, but it wasn't that long ago. I mean, maybe 10 years ago, where if you had Netflix, Hulu, and Prime Video, you were pretty much covered. You add that and an over-the-air antenna and an over-the-air DVR or something like that, and you could, you didn't need cable, and you'd probably be paying for what was then considered high speed. I remember the first high-speed internet connection I got was through AOL, and it was $24 a month. Now, comparatively speaking, the internet is still cheaper than a cable bill was. I mean, now high-speed internet maybe is like $80, but in the time of, it's not the speeds that get you, it's the amount of services that get you. And right now, I mean, unless something were to change, which I don't see that happening anytime soon, at least not voluntarily, we're living in the age of streaming television, period. And we're going to see more changes in the area of services becoming more condensed and larger. In other words, we're going to have new networks. As the old media dies, the new media will form new networks. And I'm not talking about Hulu or something like that. I'm talking about the fact that Hulu is being slowly but surely put into Disney Plus. The possibility of Paramount Plus being merged with Warner Brothers or Universal or something like that. These are just rumors now at the time, so don't take these as being any sort of news or anything like that, because that may never happen. But I've seen some reports that people speculate on it, and in terms of speculation, I do think that in the same way there were once so many movie studios and now there are very few movie studios, I think that eventually there'll be very few streaming services again, but they'll be so huge that you still won't be saving money. And by that point, it'll be too late. I know that sounds like a dire prediction, but when you really think about it, I mean, in another couple of years, as the older generation moves on, so to speak, what will happen to those networks?
I wonder if it isn't too late for us to commit suicide.
What? So, anyway, that's the line that you wouldn't probably see even in a comedy nowadays, given the seriousness at all. Let's face it, we live in extraordinary times, and suicide is definitely not something you joke about, especially, it should never be something that should be joked about, period. But as I was saying before, we really are coming to a point where it's kind of like where Kurt Vonnegut Jr. thought about the information superhighway. He said, yes, we're going to have a superhighway, but it's going to have lots of tolls. And I think it's true that we are going to have lots of great opportunities to develop and share and learn with the democratization of being able to create. But at the same time, there will be less outlets for those creators to use, simply because in the competition to dominate the streaming space, companies which are losing money will be forced to sell out into larger companies before we'll have mega corporations, kind of like, albeit different, but nevertheless, look at Max Headroom, literally the television series. Yes, Max Headroom. How network television there, it didn't, obviously, Max Headroom didn't predict the internet, but it did predict how media would control society. And in Max Headroom, much like today, you have to have a cell phone if you want to be able to have that safety. It's no longer a luxury; it's a necessity. In Max Headroom, none of the televisions have off buttons. In fact, people with a television that you can shut off literally, those people are outcasts in the society of Max Headroom, and as a result of that, it's considered a crime. Now, obviously, I don't think there's going to ever be anything like a crime not to have a cell phone, but again, in the same way that copper lines, I believe, are important and should not be replaced, because in a blackout, a copper line will still work. The technology of cell phones shouldn't just be the only way for a person to make an emergency phone call, because especially post-COVID, how many people do you know are going to just let a stranger use their telephone, somebody that they don't know? I mean, there's good Samaritans out there, but, it's really hard to tell. And can you blame them?
Mr. Dennis?
Yes.
Package for you. Sign right here.
Atlas Electric Company. Well, I didn't order anything.
Well, somebody did. Will you please sign?
Well, there must be some mistake.
Say, mister, your name's Dennis, ain't it? Yeah. Is it costing you anything?
No, but I didn't...
Well, I'm asking you like a buddy. I gotta get home because my wife is throwing a surprise party for me. Now, will you please sign?
Yeah.
I like that line. I got to get home because my wife's throwing a surprise party for me. I wonder if that person was like a character cameo or something. It's a cute joke. Now, like I said before, now we all have to have cell phones, but I still wish there were pay telephones in New York. And I know that not only are cities affected, I've been told by people who live in the country that the pay phones have all been removed there too. So what happens if your cell phone breaks and you're in the middle of nowhere, nobody's going to, or even in a big city, and nobody will let you use their phone, and you're desperate? What are you going to do? That's why, just like what if a blackout happened and you had a need for a copper line which would still work, the move to digital only should be a move that has both the digital technology but the analog technology infrastructure that already exists to back it up. I don't think that analog broadcasts should have been stopped. In fact, unfortunately, depending on where you live, while you could get some sort of signal with the old analog broadcast, with digital broadcasts, you either get it or you don't, which for some people, that's a big deal. Now, once again, this type of film, obviously, it's predicting something that would come to pass as far as the advent and importance of television and television technology. And yet, at the same time, at least when television did come out commercially, radio still existed and continued to exist all the way as far as theater of the mind. It even exists today. But the problem is that, of course, it's not so much satellite radio, because I don't really think, satellite radio offers a person a means of being able to listen to the same radio station to pay for their favorite talent. And so if you're in a car driving cross country, you're not going to be beholden to the local broadcast network, because the satellite network is all-encompassing. However, it's really internet radio that is fueling satellite, because when you really think about it, we all have Wi-Fi, and pretty much you don't need to buy satellite radio anymore. The only place where, at least for now, I could see satellite radios being helpful, I guess, in cars, that sort of thing. But eventually there's going to be Wi-Fi coming down everywhere if Elon Musk has his way. And when that happens, well, everybody will be streaming their radio. And they already are in some ways, because what does SiriusXM do? But basically, most of their market now, I believe, is not coming from radio listeners. It's coming from people who just download the app and listen to it on their cell phones. And that in itself is really, an interesting development, to put it mildly. So, it's interesting, as I said before, because we have television becoming this big head of media, and then we had the internet, and now streaming, is going to give way to something else, I believe. I don't know what exactly, but as a writer, I could tell you that before streaming existed, for example, I remember writing about something called bit streaming, which basically was just me trying to create for the sake of the storytelling, a futuristic form of what was then the internet in the time of dial-up. But at the same time, who would have thought, who could have predicted how quickly DVD, the most successful video software ever, would be all but knocked away completely, not by Blu-ray disc, but by digital copies. And while there's nothing wrong with it, of getting a digital copy, I still prefer physical media. And you'll find that even some of your top YouTubers that work in the media, some of them, if not a great many of them, have large physical media libraries, whether it be DVD, Blu-ray disc, 4K Blu-ray disc, or even those who collect Laserdisc like me. And it's ironic that VHS, while it may not make a comeback the way vinyl did, there is something to be said about the fact that people are now buying VHS tapes as a form of film preservation, which I never thought would happen.
But here he was, wrestling like tigers. In a flash, he grabs my arm with his gnashes and bites right through the bone. Here, you can see the scar yet. Not there, honey. There. Then I grabs a stranglehold. I reaches for a cradle hold.
Hey, lay off. I'm not interested in cradle holes. What happened to your father?
Oh, yeah. Well, then my old man and my best friend done a dumb thing. They got into a fight with each other. What a spot for me. What was I to do?
Well, what did you do?
Well, blood is thicker than water, so I knocked out my old man.
Again, that's one of my favorite jokes in this movie. He knocked out his father. You know, I realize that I've been going on and on about the differences of technology and how basically I feel that older things should still be preserved and exist hand in hand. And I really mean that. I mean, I still prefer to have physical books to read, and I prefer to read a novel on the train than to be dependent upon a tablet. But then again, I'm not really the market the top market that these people are appealing to. Basically, young people today have a totally different outlook, and let's face it, they're the future. One can only hope that they'll be thoughtful enough to look back at the tools that are left behind for them and to realize that it's not about acquiring new things so much as it is about sharing them and preserving them. And basically, I'm all for the preservation of any old technology because it's something that we may need to fall back on, because no one could predict the way things have changed in the last 20, 30 years. And I don't think anyone can truly predict what's going to happen in the next 30 years. So whatever it might be, if you got a copper line, hold on to it. If you live in a small town and they haven't gotten rid of your payphones yet, put a campaign out to try and preserve them. And if you own physical media, whatever you do not sell it.
What are you doing here?
Well, I heard you guys was looking for a television machine, and I'm going to show you this one.
Isn't this the dentist machine?
That's right.
I assure you, gentlemen, I knew nothing of this. Oh, you made those phone calls?
And the telegrams, too.
Why, this is ridiculous. Get this thing out of here.
Now, wait a minute, Whitey. Keep your shirt on. You ain't going anyplace till you see this machine work.
Oh, I'll call the police.
Oh, will you? Now, go on, sit down. Decompose yourself.
Hey, Griff, how rough is this going to be?
It all depends. Why?
I was just wondering.
Well, if you're worried, you can get out right now. We ain't got any room for you.
Don't worry about me. I was only asking.
Gee, I hope Rocky put it over. You ought to be telephoning pretty soon.
What are we going to say when the show starts?
Well, I could tell the Paragon Board of Directors that I love you.
Well, that would only take a couple of minutes.
Not the way I'll tell it.
So, once again, we have these, the situation, Art Deco inspired background, these beautiful, I don't know, this looks like a Hollywood backlot, but nevertheless, this beautiful brownstone buildings that are evocative of any big city. It's interesting to see how things change. I mean, even look here, and there are characters that are still wearing Edwardian collars.
But that telephone's for me. I've got to answer it.
You're not answering anything.
Well, who are you?
It goes for you, too, sister.
Somebody's coming, Griff.
Hello? Mr. Dennis? I'll see if he's in.
Keep your trap shut.
So yeah, Edwardian collars, something that was predicted in Wild Palms, does not and has not come back. But they were still wearing them in the 1930s, which I find interesting.
Everything. Look, he'll be starting in a couple of minutes.
All right, I'll get to work on that machine.
Why not, look, fellas, you come all the way down here. He's bound to start. Honest, it's the best television set in the world.
Turn on the switch.
If you don't wait now, you're missing the chance of a lifetime. You fellas look like good sports. Give us that chance.
Look!
It's working. I told you. See? See?
It's remarkably clear, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really marvelous.
There's two things I like about this sequence. One is I actually think that the fight is actually rather exciting because it's fast-paced. The punches sound actually more realistic than the stock type of punching sound that you would hear in this types of movies, even in the present. In fact, I don't think people would believe in that sort of thing if you didn't have certain things. In the same way, people have a hard time believing you can travel in space, even though there's no
Say,
sound.
if you think you can do any better, drive it yourself.
Look, so man, you got a winner at last.
Watch our stock go up.
What a fight. I should say so. That's real. Look at that celebration. He's got a trail. Look at that blow. Right. That's Griffin.
He smashed the machine.
Why, it is.
Yes,
What's kind of funny is, in a way, the fact how they're reacting to the fight was almost predicting how much fighting would also be a big part of selling broadcast television to the masses.
All right, buddy.
Rocky!
How's Fred?
He's all right, but are you hurt?
No, but they are. Do your duty.
Well, anyway, we're about at the close of the film, and I want to thank you all for listening to this commentary, and I hope you're all having a great day. It's winter right now, so if it's cold where you are, stay warm, and I'll talk to you soon.
Ain't that marvelous? Did I ever tell you science was my hobby?
Is that all you can think of, looking at them?